Two kings stand in an open field somewhere in the ancient Near East. Between them, 7 animals lie on the ground, split down the middle, arranged in 2 rows with a narrow path of blood running between them. This is not a sacrifice. This is a contract. To seal the covenant, both kings walk between the pieces. The act says, without words, "If I break this oath, let what happened to these animals happen to me." And the number of animals is not chosen at random. It is always 7. It has always been 7. Because in the ancient world, to make a binding vow was to do one specific thing. You would seven yourself. The Hebrew word for 7 is Shiva, and the Hebrew word for swearing an oath is Shava. Same root, same letters, different vowel points. For thousands of years, scholars have looked at those 2 words sitting side by side in the ancient text and asked the same question. Is this a coincidence? It is not a coincidence. And once you understand that, once you see that the number 7 in Scripture is not about luck, not about mystical energy, not about a culture that liked round numbers, everything changes. Every 7 you have ever read in the Bible stops being a decoration. It becomes a signature. There is one moment in Scripture where God himself swears an oath by raising his hand. He speaks. He names a number. And when we get there, when we reach that moment together, it will explain everything you are about to hear. But we have to start at the beginning. The very beginning. In the first chapter of the book of Genesis, God builds the world in 6 days. You know this. Most people who have been inside a church for more than one Sunday know this. But there is something about day 7 that almost everyone misses. Something hidden in plain sight since before human memory begins. Look at the structure. Days 1 through 6 follow the same pattern in the Hebrew text. There is evening. There is morning. There is a number. Day 1. Day 2. Day 3. Day 4. Day 5. Day 6. Then day 7 arrives. And the evening and the morning are gone. No evening. No morning. No closing. The 7th day in Genesis 1 has no end. And that is not a literary accident. Every ancient Hebrew reader would have noticed it immediately. A day without an evening is a day that has not closed. It is still open. It is still here. The Jewish rabbis argued about this for centuries. The writer of Hebrews picks it up in chapter 4. There remains, then, a Sabbath rest for the people of God. Not remained. Remains. Present tense. Because the 7th day never ended. You are still inside it. But here is what most people miss about that 7th day. God does not rest because he is exhausted. The God who holds the galaxies in their orbits does not need a nap. The Hebrew word used for what God does on the 7th day is shavat. He ceased. He stopped. But the text does not say he stopped because he was done with work. It says he stopped because the work was complete. And then he does 2 things he has not done to any other day in creation. He blesses it, and he sanctifies it. Those are covenant words. In the ancient Near East, when you bless something and set it apart, when you consecrated it, you were marking it as belonging to a specific relationship. The 7th day is not just a break in the schedule. It is the day God writes his name over time itself. Philo of Alexandria, the 1st century Jewish philosopher who spent his life standing at the intersection of Athens and Jerusalem, called 7 the birthday of the world. Not the 1st day, not the 6th day when man was made. The 7th. Because in Philo and Apos' reading of Genesis, the world was not finished when the last thing was created. It was finished when the covenant was sealed over it. When God rested, he was not stopping. He was swearing. Here is a question that nobody in your history class ever asked. Why does a week have 7 days? Not 6. Not 8. Not 10, which would make far more sense for a species that counts on 10 fingers. 7. Every civilization that has ever built a calendar has arrived at the same number. The Babylonians used it. The Egyptians used it. The Romans named the days of the week after their 7 planets and kept the structure. The ancient Chinese calendar divided time into 7-day cycles. The Maya, working in complete isolation from the ancient Near East, built their sacred calendar around a 7-day rhythm that scholars still cannot fully explain. And here is the part that should stop you cold. 2 of the most powerful governments in modern history looked at the 7-day week and decided it was inefficient. They had the armies, the propaganda machines, and the absolute authority to change it. And both of them failed. In 1793, the French revolutionary government abolished the 7-day week and replaced it with a 10-day cycle called the decade. The logic was clean. Base 10, metric time, rational order. No more Sunday. No more Sabbath. No more God embedded in the calendar. The experiment lasted 12 years. Napoleon ended it in 1805, not because he was religious, because the French people would not stop observing the seventh day no matter what the government told them. In 1929, the Soviet Union tried again. Stalin introduced the Neperivka, the continuous work week, cycling workers through 5-day and then 6-day schedules to break the rhythm of Sunday rest and eliminate the last traces of religious observance from Soviet life. Factories ran continuously. Churches were repurposed. The old week was declared a relic of superstition. By 1940, the Soviet government quietly restored the 7-day week. Workers were exhausted. Productivity had collapsed. The animals on Soviet collective farms were sick because even livestock, apparently, needed a 7th-day rest cycle that the commissars had not planned for. You cannot abolish the 7th day. History has tried. Stay with me, because this goes deeper than calendar politics. Dr. John Sanford, a Cornell University geneticist and the inventor of the gene gun, has spent decades studying biological rhythms in the human body. What he and other researchers have found is that the human body does not run on a 24-hour cycle alone. It runs on a 7-day cycle, what biologists call a circaseptan rhythm. Your immune response peaks and troughs on a 7-day pattern. Your blood pressure cycles in 7-day waves. Organ transplant rejection spikes at 7-day intervals. Even your body and Oppo's response to infection follows a weekly rhythm that has nothing to do with your alarm clock or your work schedule. The 7-day cycle is not a cultural habit your body learned. It is written into your biology below the level of consciousness. When God blessed the 7th day and set it apart, he was not writing a rule for the Israelites to follow in the desert. He was describing something he had already built into the physical architecture of human life. The Sabbath is not a religious invention. It is a discovery, the way gravity is a discovery, the way the speed of light is a discovery. It was always there. Someone just had to look. And now watch what happens when that number moves out of creation and into relationship. Because 7 in Genesis is about time. But 7 in the rest of Scripture is about something even more personal than that. It is about the moment when God decides to bind himself, by oath, by blood, by promise, to specific people in a specific story. It is about covenant. And the first time you see it, you are standing in a field in Canaan with an old man named Abraham, watching him hand 7 small white lambs to a foreign king, and wondering what on earth he is doing. Abraham is 100 years old, and he is standing in a field in the Negev with a man named Abimelech, the king of Gerar. They have had trouble between them. Wells have been seized. Servants have been threatened. The kind of low-level border conflict that in the ancient Near East could escalate into blood and fire without much warning. But Abraham wants peace. And in the ancient world, peace between two parties was not achieved through diplomacy. It was achieved through covenant, a binding oath, witnessed, sealed, and permanent. So Abraham does something that looks strange to modern eyes. He separates 7 ewe lambs from his flock, young, unblemished, white, and he sets them apart from the rest of the animals. Abimelech looks at the 7 lambs and asks the obvious question, "What are these 7 ewe lambs you have set apart by themselves?" And Abraham answers, "Accept these 7 lambs from my hand as a witness that I dug this well. Not as payment, not as a gift, as a witness, as a living, breathing, walking oath." Each lamb is a sworn statement. Together, the 7 of them constitute a covenant so binding that the place where it happens gets a name that carries both meanings simultaneously, Beersheba, the well of 7, the well of the oath. In Hebrew, you cannot separate those two meanings because they were never meant to be separated. To swear at Beersheba is to seven yourself at Beersheba. And now pay attention, because the same man and Apos' grandson is about to do something that makes the pattern undeniable. Jacob is young and in love and desperate. He has arrived at his uncle Laban and Apos' house in the hill country of Paddan Aram with nothing but the clothes on his back and a promise God made to his grandfather in a dream about a ladder. He sees Rachel, Laban and Apos' younger daughter, and the text says he loves her immediately, the way you know certain things without being able to explain why. He offers to work for her. Laban names his price, 7 years. Jacob agrees. And the text says something that has been read at weddings and quoted in love songs for 3,000 years. So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. Then Laban deceives him. He gives Jacob the older daughter, Leah, instead. And when Jacob confronts him in the morning, furious, heartbroken, betrayed, Laban offers him Rachel as well. For another 7 years of work, Jacob agrees again. 14 years. 2 cycles of 7. The man who would become Israel sevened himself twice for the woman he loved. And when his descendants read this story, they did not miss what was happening. Jacob was not just a romantic. Jacob was enacting the covenant structure God had built into creation, binding himself by sevens, the way his grandfather had bound himself by sevens, the way God had bound the seventh day by sevens at the beginning of time. The pattern is not accidental. It is inherited. And now the pattern goes to war. 3 generations later, the descendants of Jacob are standing at the edge of the promised land, looking at a city that should be impossible to take. Jericho, the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world. Josephus, writing in the 1st century, calls it the most ancient city of the Canaanites. Its walls are not just thick. They are double-walled, an outer wall and an inner wall with a gap between them wide enough for houses to be built inside. The city has been fortified for 10,000 years. It has survived empires. And God and Apos' battle plan is this: walk around it, in silence, once a day, for 6 days. 7 priests, 7 trumpets made of rams and Apos, horns, shofars, the instrument of the covenant assembly. 7 circuits on the 7th day. And then, on the 7th circuit of the 7th day, every person in the army shouts at once. And the walls fall inward. Now here is what most people miss about Jericho. This is not a military strategy. There is no military strategy in the ancient world, or any world, in which walking in circles produces structural collapse in fortified stone walls. What Joshua is doing at Jericho is not a battle. It is a covenant ritual. The 7 priests, the 7 days, the 7 circuits, the silence, the shout. Every element of it maps onto the ancient treaty ceremony you saw at the beginning. The ceremony of sevening yourself before a witness. Israel is not attacking Jericho. Israel is enacting a covenant lawsuit against a city that has rejected the God of heaven. The walls do not fall because of sound pressure. They fall because the oath has been spoken, the 7 has been completed, and what was pledged has now been executed. Josephus, for all his skepticism about miraculous events, records the fall of Jericho in his Antiquities of the Jews without embellishment. The walls fell. The city was taken. He notes the deliberateness of the 7-day structure and the priestly procession without fully explaining it, because Josephus, brilliant as he was working in Greek categories that did not have a word for what the Hebrew text was actually describing. The word is shava, to seven, to oath, to bind by covenant until the promise is complete. And it is not finished yet. Naaman is not the kind of man who takes instructions well. He is the commander of the Syrian army, the most powerful military officer in one of the most powerful nations in the ancient Near East. He has won battles. He has the ear of a king. He rides into Elisha and Apos' house with horses and chariots and a letter from the king of Aram and enough silver and gold to buy a small city. He has come for a miracle, and he expects it to be delivered with appropriate ceremony. Instead, Elisha does not even come to the door. He sends a servant with a message. The message is 7 words in the original Hebrew and approximately that many in English. Go, wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan. Naaman and Apos' reaction is immediate and magnificent in its fury. The Jordan? The Jordan is a muddy, unremarkable river. Damascus has better rivers. Naaman has bathed in better rivers his whole life. He turns his horses around. He is going home. He did not ride all this way to be insulted by a prophet who will not even show his face. And then his servants do something brave. They approach him. Carefully, the way you approach a man with that kind of pride when you need him to hear something he does not want to hear, and one of them says, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more, then, when he tells you, wash and be cleansed?" Naaman stops. He goes to the Jordan. He dips once. Nothing. He dips twice. Nothing. 3 times. 4, 5, 6. And with each dip, The text does not tell us what Naaman is thinking, but you can feel it. The humiliation of a great man doing a small thing, again and again, with nothing to show for it. With the mud of the Jordan still on his skin and his soldiers watching from the bank and the silence of heaven pressing down on the whole unremarkable scene, he dips a seventh time, and his skin becomes like the skin of a young child. Why 7? Why not 1? Why not 3? The number of resurrection, of divine action, of morning after darkness. Why does Naaman have to go down into that water 6 times with nothing happening before the 7th time changes everything? Because that is what covenant completion looks like. The Greek word teleos, brought to its intended end, complete, perfect in the sense of having arrived at its purpose, is not about instant transformation. It is about the full arc. It is about arriving at the place God designed you to reach by going through every step He prescribed, in the order He prescribed them, without skipping the ones that feel pointless. Naaman and Apos' healing was not in the water. It was in the 7th. It was in the moment when the full number was reached, when the complete oath of obedience was enacted, and heaven recognized that something had been finished. Here is the part nobody tells you about Naaman and Apos' story. He goes back to Elisha afterward and offers him gifts. Elisha refuses everyone. Naaman asks if he can take 2 mule loads of Israelite soil back to Damascus, because he has decided that from now on, he will only worship the God of Israel, and he wants to stand on Israelite ground when he does it. It is one of the strangest, most tender requests in the entire Old Testament. A Syrian general asking for dirt, because he has understood something in that river that no amount of silver could buy. The 7th dip did not just heal his skin. It completed him. Solomon has been king for 4 years when he begins building the temple. It takes 7 years to finish it. That is recorded in 1 Kings chapter 6 with the specificity of a building log. 7 years. Then Solomon waits. He does not dedicate the temple the moment it is finished. He waits for the 7th month, the month of Ethanim, the month of the Feast of Tabernacles, the holiest convergence of the Hebrew calendar. And then he consecrates it over 7 days. The Ark of the Covenant is carried into the temple by the priests, 7 priests, carrying 7 trumpets, echoing Jericho so precisely that any Israelite standing in that courtyard would have felt the hair rise on the back of their neck. This is the same procession, the same number. The same covenant ritual that brought down walls is now being used to open a house for the presence of God. Solomon and Apos' prayer at the dedication is one of the longest prayers recorded in Scripture. He asks God to forgive Israel for their sins, for their failures, for the times they will turn away and need to come back. And if you count the times Solomon uses the word forgive in that prayer, you will find it exactly 7 times. Not 6, not 8, 7. And then, on the 7th day of the 7-day ceremony, in the 7th month of the year, the glory cloud of God fills the temple so completely that the priests cannot stand up to minister. They fall down, not out of performance, not out of choreographed reverence, because the weight of what is in that room is more than human bodies were built to stand in. The Hebrew word for that weight is kavod, glory, heaviness, the unbearable substance of a presence that does not fit inside human categories. It arrives on the 7th day. It always arrives on the 7th. And now watch what happens next, because everything you have seen in this video has been building toward one moment. One angel, one raised hand, one oath spoken at the end of history. And the number he uses will close every loop we have opened since that field in the ancient Near East, where 2 kings walked between the pieces of 7 animals, and the air smelled of blood and promise. John is old. He is the last of the 12 still alive. The others have been martyred, scattered, silenced. He has outlived Peter, who was crucified upside down. He has outlived Paul, who was beheaded on the Appian Way. He has outlived James, who was killed with a sword in Jerusalem while Herod watched the crowd to see if they approved. John has survived all of it, the arrests, the persecutions, the slow grinding pressure of an empire that has decided the followers of Jesus are a problem to be solved. And now he is on an island. Patmos is a small volcanic rock in the Aegean Sea, roughly 13 square miles of black basalt and scrub brush, used by Rome as a place to exile political prisoners too inconvenient to execute and too prominent to ignore. John has been sent here because he will not stop talking about Jesus. He is, By most estimates, somewhere between 80 and 90 years old. He has no army, no political influence, no publishing house. He is an old man on a rock in the middle of the sea. And on a Sunday, the Lord and Apos, day, he calls it, heaven opens. What John sees in the next several hours is the most structured, most numerically precise vision in the entire Bible. And the number that organizes every single piece of it is the number you have been tracing since the first day of creation. 7 churches, 7 spirits before the throne, 7 golden lampstands, 7 stars in the right hand of the one who looks like the Son of Man, 7 seals on the scroll that no one in heaven or on earth is worthy to open, until the Lamb steps forward, and the elders fall down, and the 4 living creatures sing a song that has not stopped in 2,000 years. 7 trumpets, 7 bowls of wrath, 7 thunders whose voices John is told to seal up and not write down. The only part of Revelation that remains unwritten, the only 7s that are still hidden. This is not chaos. This is not apocalyptic fever dream. This is a legal document. In the ancient Near East, covenant treaties between a great king and a lesser nation followed a precise structure. And when that covenant was broken, the great king issued what scholars call a covenant lawsuit. The violated king listed his grievances. He called witnesses. He pronounced judgment. And the judgment was executed in stages, warnings first, then increasing severity, then final resolution. Revelation is a covenant lawsuit. God is the great king. The broken world is the lesser party. The 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, the 7 bowls, these are not random disasters. They are the structured, legally precise execution of a covenant that was established in Genesis and violated by every generation since. And then we reach chapter 10. John sees another angel. Mighty, he says, wrapped in a cloud, with a rainbow above his head and a face like the sun and legs like pillars of fire. The angel plants his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land. He holds a small scroll, open. He shouts with a voice like the roar of a lion. And when he shouts, 7 thunders speak. And John reaches for his pen to write what they said, and a voice from heaven stops him. Seal it up. Do not write it. And then the angel does something that has not happened anywhere else in Scripture. He raises his right hand toward heaven. This is the ancient gesture of oath-taking. Every reader in the first century would have recognized it immediately. You see it in Roman courtrooms, in Israelite covenant ceremonies, in the treaty rituals of every major civilization in the ancient world. When you raise your right hand toward heaven, you are calling God as your witness. You are swearing. And the angel swears by the one who lives forever and ever, who created the heavens and the earth and the sea and everything in them. And he says, there will be no more delay. In the days of the 7th angel, when he is about to sound his trumpet, the mystery of God will be accomplished, just as he announced to his servants the prophets. The mystery of God. Accomplished. Complete. Finished. The 7th trumpet. The 7th angel. The oath sworn with a raised hand at the end of history. Remember what we said at the beginning, that there is one moment in Scripture where God himself swears an oath by raising his hand, and that the number he uses would explain everything? This is that moment. Not a human king walking between animal pieces in a field. Not Abraham setting apart 7 lambs. Not Joshua marching 7 priests around a city that should have been impossible to take. Heaven itself raises its hand, and it swears by 7. The number that God wrote into the structure of time in Genesis 1. The number he embedded in the covenant at Beersheba, enacted at Jericho, required of Naaman in the Jordan, woven into the stones of Solomon and Apos' temple. That same number is the number spoken by an angel with 1 foot on the sea and 1 foot on the land at the moment history reaches its completion. Creation began with a 7. History ends with a 7. And everything in between is the story of a God who has been keeping his oath the entire time. But there is one more 7, the one that holds all the others together. Jesus is on the cross for 6 hours. From the 3rd hour to the 9th hour, 9 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. He hangs between 2 criminals on a hill outside Jerusalem while the city goes about its business, and the soldiers divide his clothes, and the crowd reads the sign above his head with varying degrees of contempt and grief. During those 6 hours, he speaks 7 times. 7 words from the cross. Theologians have been counting and arranging and meditating on those 7 statements for 2,000 years, from the early church fathers through Augustine, through every Good Friday service that has ever been held in every language on earth. 7 words, 7 utterances, 7 moments of speech from a man who is dying and choosing every word with the full weight of a life that has never wasted one. The first word is forgiveness. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. The second is promise, to the criminal beside him. Today you will be with me in paradise. The third is relationship, to his mother and to John. Woman, here is your son. Here is your mother. The fourth is the most devastating. My God, why have you forsaken me? The only time in the gospel record that Jesus does not call God Father. The moment of separation that no theology has ever fully explained. The fifth is thirst. I am thirsty, the most human thing he says. The sixth is declaration. The seventh is surrender. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And he dies. The Greek behind it is finished. The sixth utterance, the one that sounds like the end, is tetelestai. A single word in the Greek. A perfect passive indicative. The action is complete, brought to its intended end, and the effects of that completion will never be undone. It is the same root as teleos. The same idea as the 7th day of creation. The same concept as Naaman standing in the Jordan with clean skin and a stunned expression and the mud of 7 dips still drying on his robe. Something has been finished, not abandoned, not interrupted, not paused until further notice. Finished, in the way that the 7th day was finished, in the way that Beersheba was finished, in the way that the walls of Jericho were finished. Completely, covenantally, with the full weight of an oath that was sworn before the first star was lit and the first river ran to the first sea. The cross is the 7th day of redemption. The rest God promised from the beginning. The open 7th day with no evening, the day that never closed, finds its meaning here. On this hill, in this death, in this single Greek word spoken by a man with nails in his hands who is completing something that started before you were born and will hold you longer than you can imagine. So let Endopos, bring this home. You have traveled a long way in this video. You started in a field in the ancient Near East where 2 kings walked between the pieces of 7 animals and sealed something with blood. You watched God write the number into the structure of time itself, into the 7th day that has no evening, into the week that no empire has ever successfully abolished, into the circus septon rhythms of your own body that nobody put there and nobody can take out. You watched Abraham hand 7 lambs to a foreign king at a well that carried both meanings of the word simultaneously. You watched Jacob work 14 years, 2 cycles of 7, for a woman he loved without counting the cost. You watched Joshua march 7 priests around a city that should have been impossible to take, and you watched the walls fall inward not because of acoustics, but because a covenant had been completed. You watched Naaman dip 6 times with nothing happening and once more with everything changing. You watched Solomon and Apos' glory cloud arrive on the 7th day of the 7th month at the end of 7 years of building. You watched an old man on a volcanic rock raise his eyes to heaven and see the most numerically precise vision in the history of human literature. And you watched a man on a cross speak 7 words, the last of which was surrender, and the one before it was a single Greek verb that means the oath has been kept, the promise has been fulfilled. The 7th day has finally arrived. 3 things to take with you. The first is this. 7 is not a lucky number. It never was. Every culture that has ever called 7 lucky was accidentally remembering something true. The way a dream can carry the weight of a real memory without being able to tell you where it came from. The number 7 in Scripture is the number of covenant oath. It is the number God uses when he is not just making a statement, but binding himself to it. Every time you see it in the Bible, every 7 priests, every 7 days, every 7 dips, every 7 seals, God is not decorating the text. He is signing his name. He is saying, I am bound to this. I will not turn back. What I have promised will be completed. That is not luck. That is something infinitely more reliable than luck. The second thing, the Sabbath was never just a rule about rest, not a productivity hack, not a religious checkbox for people who have nothing better to do on Sundays. The 7th day in Genesis is a standing invitation. written into the structure of creation before there was a single human law or religious institution in existence, into the rhythm that God himself established when he blessed time and sanctified it and called it complete. The Sabbath is not what you do when your work is done. The Sabbath is what reminds you that your worth was never in your work to begin with. You were made on the sixth day. You were given rest on the seventh. The first full day of your existence as a human being was not a day of labor. It was a day of receiving, of being held inside a completed creation before you had done a single thing to deserve it. That rhythm is still available. It has not been abolished. It has not been replaced. The writer of Hebrews says it plainly. There remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. The seventh day is still open. You are still invited into it. And the third thing, the one that matters most. When Jesus said tetelestai from the cross, he was not announcing his own defeat. He was not giving up. He was not expressing relief that the suffering was finally ending. He was making a covenant declaration, the same kind of declaration that Abraham made at Beersheba, that Joshua enacted at Jericho, that Solomon celebrated in the seventh month with the glory of God so heavy in that room that no human body could stay upright. He was saying, the oath has been kept. Every seven in Scripture, from the seventh day of creation to the seven seals of Revelation, was pointing toward this moment. The God who rested on the seventh day was not finished with his work. He was beginning the longest covenant in history. A covenant that would run through Abraham and Jacob and Joshua and Naaman and Solomon and John on a rock in the Aegean Sea and arrive, finally, at a hill outside Jerusalem where the Son of God spoke 7 words and kept every promise his Father had ever made. Tetelestai. It is finished. Not your striving, not your searching, not your attempt to be enough. The debt is finished. The covenant is complete. The seventh day has arrived, and it was purchased not with 7 white lambs set apart in a field, but with a life set apart before the foundation of the world for you. That word was spoken for you. If this video made you see the Bible differently, if the sevens look different to you now than they did 25 minutes ago, leave a comment below. Tell me which 7 surprised you most. Was it the Hebrew root of Shiva and Shava? Was it Napoleon and Apos? Failed calendar? Was it Naaman in the Jordan, dipping 6 times with nothing happening? Was it the angel raising his hand at the end of Revelation? Tell me. I read every one. And if you have not subscribed yet, if you found this video through a search or a share and you want more of this kind of Bible content, the subscribe button is right there. We go deep here. We take the text seriously. And we are just getting started. The God who rested on the seventh day has not stopped working. He is completing something, and you are part of it.